Meditations of my heart and my mind be acceptable to you, gracious and loving God. Allow me to be an instrument of your will, your peace, and your love. This past week I substituted at Tulpehocken Junior High School. I really take that back. They changed the name. Things change all the time. It's like yesterday I went and bought a battery for my one car. It was $250. Yeah, that's a chunk. And I remember when they were like $75, you know. Life changes. But I take that back. They now call it the middle school because they're going through a whole reconstruction, and they're going to, with a physical plant, and probably they'll realign the structure of the grade levels. Another example of change. Change is something that each one of us deals with on a daily basis. Even Jesus talked about that today, by the way. In any case, the class that I was covering was 8th grade in language arts. In Tulpehocken High School, they structured the language arts program into junior high that you have 2 periods each day of language arts. The students have 2 classes back to back. Unbeknownst to me, during these 2 periods, one of the school counselors came in. It wasn't in the notes, came in, and along with the co-teacher taught a sermon on kindness. Kindness. Imagine kindness and empathy. Imagine that they need to be taught in school. Probably in part because of the bullying and the unkindness that the kids show to one another. 7th and 8th grade is a lot of drama there. I think all of us would agree that possibly something lacking at home and maybe the lack of church attendance might be a contributor. In any case, because of my background, I was able to add a little bit here and there, which they appreciated. I'm always afraid when I'm a sub that I might step on somebody's toes. I certainly don't mean to. I was able to add this discussion about empathy, kindness, strength, versus weakness. As an aside, I told him about the shirt my friend Rick made that his wife, his widow, gave me. It says, exercise kindness. I was going to wear that the next day, but I didn't. Maybe next week. The drama in 7th, 8th grade is unbelievably high. The presenters talked about and gave illustrations of mean girl confrontations. Mean girl confrontations. Some of them can be really nasty. They gave examples talking behind one's back, other subtle ways of unkindness, perhaps sometimes not too subtle. What do you do when you see unkindness? What do you do when you see the drama around you? The whispering behind one's back? Do you confront it? Or do you ignore it? Or do you join in? Have you seen or experienced this here at Salem Pencils? What do you do about it? In today's society, we think of weakness and strength as opposites. Bullies are usually bullies because they're weak inside. They have to show everybody they are. It's like Mr. Putin and other people. They have to puff themselves up. We see it down the road with these trucks. I hope nobody has one that's 5 feet off the ground. They have to show how strong they are through their trucks. The strong is good, and it means to be without weakness. To be weak is bad, and it means to be without strength. Most of us want to be thought of as strong. We're often concerned that people won't think highly of us if we show our weaknesses and our errors and our shortcomings. During the class and subsequently, I remembered a recent article about the view of some people that have towards Christ and his teachings. The whole concept of forgiveness, turning the other cheek, exhibiting humbleness are seen as weaknesses, not to be done. Their weakness can never do that. This view of this view of the teachings of Jesus as weaknesses are being played out on a daily basis in the workplace, in the school, and in the political arena. This view leads people who bully, who try to take control by overpowering, degrading, and negating others, name-calling and shaming, all based on weakness. When reading today's readings, especially the Beatitudes, which begin the Sermon on the Mount, I started to think of the last several days of Jesus. A life of ridicule, abuse, humiliation, and eventually crucifixion. Sure doesn't look like strength to me. I remember seeing sermons entitled, God of Weakness. Wait a minute, God of weakness, God of weakness. I can see God of glory, I can see God of holiness, I can see God of love, and the God of forgiveness. But a God of weakness, it just doesn't click with some people. In verses 3 through 9, Jesus describes 7 statements or descriptions of happiness. Blessed, meaning happiness. In verses 10 through 12, Jesus turns it around and states, blessed is the one who stands for God's unique kind of justice, God's righteousness, and is persecuted for it. This is the justice that judges in favor of peace, not war, love, not hate, mercy, not condemnation. This is a new kind of judgment, the judgment of love, the judgment to embrace God's embrace, and the one who seeks the unique kind of divine righteousness. A little different than most of us are taught. Paul was seemingly a strong man and had a fruitful ministry. His visions of heaven strengthened him to endure the hardships and motivated him in his labor for the gospel. But Paul did not boast in the details of his visions or his strength. He refused to boast in his strength. He boasted only in his weaknesses. Paul wanted people to think highly of Christ alone, to see his power, to see his strength. Yet Paul says Jesus was crucified in weakness. At the cross, Jesus chose a position of weakness, accompanying the mighty purpose of becoming weak. Through weakness comes strength. Again, according to Paul, the weakness of Jesus is not the final word, for he was crucified in weakness, but lived by the power of God. The weakness is his prelude to his glory. The weakness of the cross is not just a historical note, but it's a model for Christian living for us today. To those who follow Jesus are not called to dominate others. They're not called to be bullies or dominate others. We are called to humble obedience. An obedience that something entails, sometimes suffering. We are tend to view weakness as a problem. However, Paul sees it as a part of normal Christian life. Richard Dawkins, an atheist, mocked the Christians for his belief in Jesus, saying, "You believe that the creator of the universe, the God who devised the laws of physics and laws of mathematics, that this genius could think of no better way to rid the world of sin than to come up with this little speck of cosmic dust and have him tortured and executed so that he could forgive?" Actually, who would imagine that God would do it this way? To Dawkins, this is an argument against Christianity, against Christ, against Christian faith. For Paul, it's the very center of Christian life and Christian faith. It shows that God works through weaknesses, as he did on Good Friday, and he continues to do today, as he continues to do today. Last week at the social time downstairs, after the service, someone mentioned the movie Friendly Persuasion. Actually, I think it was Rich. which really surprised me that anybody remembered that. It's one of my favorite childhood movies. Even today, you can hear me mention, heard me mention it before. It's about a Quaker family during the Civil War. The part mentioned last week, Rich mentioned this as carriages between the Quaker and I think Presbyterian, and they were racing their carriages, much to the chagrin of the Quaker mother, because it's not necessarily a Quaker attribute to be racing to church or to meeting. But he enjoyed it, and certainly the other fellow did as well. It was to see who could get there first. Again, not necessarily a Christian view or a Quaker attitude. I remember the organ in that movie. Not allowed to have music in Quakerism at that time. And they were up, the kids were up there, the elders from the church were interviewing this fellow because it's racing to church. And he gave the most eloquent and loud response to their questions, basically to overcome the sound of the organ. I also remember the soldier that went after Samantha the goose. Not until that point, these people said, take what you need, do no harm. But when it came to Samantha, that pet goose, this woman, in an un-Quaker fashion, just beat that soldier with a broom. In the weakness, sometimes strength. Not a Quaker attribute either. Possibly not a friendly manner. And it's an example of what we never know what we will do until we're faced with it. And I've been asked that several times, more than several times over the last 50 years. What do you do if? What do you do if? I hope I know what I would do if this happens. I would hope I would work the peacefulness of Christ. I would hope I would extend that to the other person. But I also have had clients that have told me that the first time they were in war and they had to kill themselves, they messed their pants, they peed their pants, they threw up. We never know. Others ran away. We never know. We never know. It's about the strength in weakness. How do we stand up against the outside influences in our society that are counter to the way of Jesus? Boy, if we look around today, man, there's a lot of stuff that's counter to Jesus. How do we stand against the name-calling in our political arena? How do we stand against people calling names and belittling other people? How do we stand? What do we think of that when it happens? Do we applaud it? Some people do. They think it's funny. I don't. I think it's an example of weakness when you have to name-call other people. How do we respond to bullies in our midst? How do we stand against the bullies in our everyday life? We've all had them at work, at school, in our neighborhood, perhaps even here at church. How do we stand against violence that we see in our streets and the violence that we see throughout the world? Now, if you read this online, you'll see the next word is tomorrow, but actually it's today. I wrote it yesterday. Today is All Saints Sunday, also known as Martyrs' Day. It is a day in which faithful Christians consider those who have been witnesses or martyrs. That's the key there, martyrs, witnesses. We need to remember that in the New Testament, martyr means witness, one who attests to God's faithfulness. Shortly, the saints who have passed on this year will be mentioned, their names called out. What I would like you to do is think about how their witness to God, to God's faithfulness, has had an impact on you. If you have other people not mentioned, perhaps those who've passed on before, or those that just aren't on the list, I'd like you to ask the same question. How these people of faith have had an impact on you. Who are the people And how did they share their witness to God's